Okay, so type animators give you the ability to animate text line by line, word by word, character by character. Okay, speed version. This is what we're going to be creating right here, this little bottom third of Tony Cruz. We're going to create that text right from a text layer, okay, with type animators. Let's go back to comp 1. I'm just going to type some text. If I can remember how I did this the first time. I've got my alignment panel, and I've got my alignment panel set to composition, so I'm just going to click center vertical and horizontal. There we go. And I'm going to fly open this text box, click on animate, and I'm going to add a scale animation to this. Okay, so remember the two things that happened here were that each letter got its own little X. That's its own little anchor point that these animations are going to happen around. By default, they animate character by character. Okay, let me zoom out. And in our layers panel, which I've made bigger because this is going to get pretty extensive, I've got this animator 1. Let's see if I can zoom in here a little bit. Animator 1. Inside of that, I've got a range selector, and the range selector is actually what we're going to be animating with several different properties, being scale, rotation, and opacity in this case, to get the effect that the Tony Cruz video just had. Okay, now, again, the best way to think about the range selector, I'm just going to fly it open. It's got a start point. Let me zoom out. It's got a start point and an end point. So start 0%, end at 100%. You can see if I bring the end point down to say 65, your range selector actually pulls in from the right-hand side. I need to actually apply a scale to this. I'm going to pull that down to 50%. So you can see that only the letters that are within the range will have the scale parameter applied to them. So because I'm saying that the range ends at 65%, these layers aren't affected by the scale parameter. Okay, I can do the same thing with the start. I can say, have my range start at 25. So any letters within or characters within the first 25% and the last 65% don't get the scale range. Sorry, they're outside of the range selector, so they don't have the scale parameter applied to them. So let's just go ahead and we'll reset those back to 0 and 100. That's the best way to think about range selectors, because we're going to do an animation now, and we're going to animate the range selector with different properties, those being scale, rotation, and opacity. Okay. So we want to actually animate the start parameter, because right now we've got this set to 50%. I'm just going to click the stopwatch next to the start parameter to add a keyframe. Okay. And I'm going to scrub my timeline, my current time indicator. Maybe I'll go to like a second and a half, 1 second and 15 frames, which you see over here. Can you see that? You see over here? Okay. And I'll just crank up the start value to 100%. You can see what's happening here is as I scrub this to the right, my range selector is moving, including or taking away the scale parameter from the text, returning it to its full size. Does that make sense to everybody? I basically just took the scale attribute that I applied away from the original text. So that's now what it looks like. And if I scrub this timeline, you can see my range selector moving through it. Now don't do this. I can click on this and I can click on this and move it if I want on my own, but you can see what happens here is because I've already got keyframes set, it's adding a new keyframe because I'm making changes to that. So I'm just going to undo that. That's another way that you can adjust your range selector if you feel the need to. Okay, so you can see that it's doing it one character at a time. So let's add a new parameter because we want to actually, these rotate in. Sorry, I have to keep thinking that I'm working backwards. From this angle upwards. So that's a negative angle, right? Because it's to the left. So let's add a new parameter to this animator 1. Okay, so don't click on animate again. What we want to do is we want to add a new parameter. So right beside the add button, we've got another little caret that we're going to click on. We're going to add a new property, which is rotation. Okay, so at 0, from 0 to 100%, when start actually animates to 100%, we want it to end here. So at the beginning, this first keyframe, we want to change this. Let's change this rotation. I'm scrubby sliding on top of that second value. Remember, this is how many times you want them to rotate. This is if you just want to use a certain angle value. That's what I'm going to use. I'm just going to drag this down to say 65. Unfortunately, I'm so zoomed in you can't see what's happening on my screen, but hopefully you guys see it. So that's what happened. Each letter actually rotated to the left around that anchor point, which is that X underneath that letter. So now if you scrub your slider, it's doing this type of thing. I'm not really liking how they're starting at 50%. So what I might do is I'm going to drag my scale all the way down to 0. So I can't see them, and they come in one letter at a time. Okay, is everybody following me? So the last thing I want to do is I want each letter to fade in from 0% opacity up to 100% opacity, one at a time, as opposed to doing the whole layer at once. So I'm going to put my time indicator back to 0, and I'm going to add one more value to this animator 1. Add property opacity. Have I still got everybody? Okay, looks like it. Now I'm going to change this opacity. Remember, 100% is where I'm finishing here. So I want to start at 0. So I'm just going to scrub this. Whoop, I don't know what happened with that, but let's just scrub this down to 0. And now if I scrub my time indicator, you can see that they start off opaque. And they end up, each letter ends up at full opacity as it gets to its largest point. All right, so I promised you that we could do this word by word as opposed to just character by character. So we'll do that, and then we'll go back to character by character because it's not a heck of a lot of work. Under your advanced options right here underneath range selector, everybody see that? Go ahead and just open that up. See if I can zoom in here. So under the advanced options, the first thing that we want to change is this, which is units. Because right now everything's being displayed as a percentage, including our range selector. So it's always being displayed in a percentage, whether it's 0 or 100. If we change this from units, the units from percentage to index, what it actually does is it actually creates an index of what we've got on our screen. So instead of this now being from 0% to 100%, it's showing me the number 11. The number 11 is actually the number of characters that I've got in my name, including the space in between my first and last name. So as I scrub my time indicator, you can see that, let me zoom out here a little bit just so we can see what's going on in both sections. It's now showing me, instead of a percentage, it's showing me a number. So right now I'm 9.5 characters into this. This one's halfway through. The first 9 are all the way in. All right. The next value we need to change is based on. So this is based on characters, because I have 11 characters. But we can change this to words. Now it still shows me my character number, but trust me, when we scrub this, you'll see it's based on words. So I just have to go a little bit farther, bless you. So my first word animates in, my second word animates in. Now, remember, I've still got 11 characters here, and does anybody notice anything that's still happening? That might be a little funky chicken. I don't really want. So the anchor point for each character is still at the bottom center of each character, as opposed to the bottom center of the word itself. Remember, I want to animate the word in. I don't want the animation to apply to each character. So to do that, I need to go under this little option right here called More Options. Open that up. And I need to change this anchor point grouping. Because right now each character, you can see here in the drop-down menu, has its own anchor point. So I want to change that drop-down from character to word. And you'll see what happens as I do that on the screen. Now each word has its own little X, which is its own little anchor point. So now as I scrub my slider, you can see that that animation is now happening on a word per word basis as opposed to a character per character basis. So we've got each word coming in separately, and we've got the animation happen. So we've got our anchor point set up for the word as opposed to remaining on each character. Have I got everybody still? Okay. One quick thing that I want to show you. What if you wanted to change your anchor point? You can do that right here under the grouping alignment. Now again, you can do this for words, you can do this for characters just simply by changing this drop-down menu. But this little value right here is how you would change it. So x-axis, y-axis, your first value is always your x, your second value is always your y. If I were to just scrub this to the left, watch the little, it's hard to see, watch the little red square and how it moves to the left with it. So now I'm just changing the point of origin or your anchor point. So now I'm going to get rotation around that as opposed to the center at the bottom of these words. So if I drag this down, you can see that that's my new point of origin. So you guys can mess around with that if you like. All right. I'm hopefully not going to confuse you more, but I'm going to actually just put all this back to the way I found it. So I'm going to set my grouping alignment back to 0 and 0. I'm going to change my anchor point grouping to character. So that's all I really need to do under more options. Now everything's animating the way it was before, except it's on a word per word basis. So I'm going to shut that off. I can close the more options menu now. And I need to change some of these advanced options under the range selector back to the way they were. So I want this to be based on characters, not words. And the units you can leave as index if you like. I'm just going to change it back to percentage because I find percentages easier to work with. So there, we're back to our original animation. I'm just going to close this advanced menu item. So there's a lot of stuff going on in there, right? And that's just for one animator. You can see here, we've just got animator 1. You can apply other animators if you want. So if you've got your text layer selected, and you click on the, this is where you have to be careful. If you want to add a new parameter to a range selector, just make sure you're clicking the add button, the little arrow beside the add button here, as opposed to the animate button, because I'll show you what happens. Let's say you wanted to change the color. So you want to apply a color overlay to this, and you were to click on animate as opposed to add, and you went to fill color RGB. Now by default it's giving me red. But look what happened here. It added a second animator. And so right away, because this range selector is set at 0 and 100, it's giving me red right away, right out of the gate. Actually, it's going to go, yeah, it's going to be red all the time. Now, that could either be your best friend or it could be your worst enemy, depending on what you want to accomplish. Maybe you only want the second word to be red. Well, that's kind of easy to do. You guys, you don't necessarily have to do this part, but I just wanted to show you what could happen, what kind of trouble you could run into if you get this and this mixed up. Okay, then you get a second animator. Maybe I only want my fill color to start. I'll add a keyframe here to my start. I don't want it to be applied to the first, I don't know, where am I here? 38%. So after 38%, need to move that to there. And my second word is only red. So the red, the fill color of red, is only applied to the range after 46 to 100. So I turned it off for basically my first word. And if I needed to change it, I can do so. Does that make sense to everybody? So you could do some pretty complex stuff with several different types of animators on text. All right, so the last thing I wanted to show you, I'm just gonna close all these because I want to get some of this space back on my layers panel. So the last thing I want to show you is just a little tip or a little trick to keep you from getting tripped up when you're animating shape layers. Let me zoom out here, so I need to grab my shape tool. Grab your shape tool. A rectangle is going to be good because we're actually going to create that little white line that goes from the right to the left. So I'm going to grab my shape tool. It's going to be white. I've got my foreground color set to white, my no stroke applied to it. I'm just going to click and drag out a box that underline. It looks like an underline underneath my whole piece of text here. Oops. Make sure you don't have your text layer selected, or else you'll be creating a mask. So here we go. Everybody with me? Before I click off of this, I want to make one observation with this, is that any time you draw a new shape layer, you get an anchor point that's automatically attached to that shape layer. And that anchor point is always right in the center of whatever size screen you pick. And you can see that right here. Okay. Now we've been doing a lot of stuff with the transform tool, and I want to show you how it can kind of trip you up a little bit, and there's a way to let it not do that. So open up your transform parameter underneath that underneath your shape layer, and on the rotation attribute, just go ahead and click and rotate this thing by scrubbing your degrees left and right. And notice what's happening here. This object is rotating around that anchor point in the center of your screen. And so this might not be optimally what you want. You might want to rotate around the actual center of this object, or around the left side or the bottom right corner of the object itself. There's two ways around this, and the first way is one that I'll show you, but I don't recommend. If you can actually change your anchor point right up here with this, it's called the pan behind or the anchor point tool, which is this. Sorry, can you guys see that? It's the one to the left of your shape tool, this one right here. If you click on that, you can actually move this anchor point. Okay. Now it's not very accurate because it's just really wherever you want to drop it. Or you can put your position in here. So if you know the exact position on the full size of your screen, then that's fine. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to use another method for this. I'm going to close the transform attributes underneath my shape layer. And I'm going to open up this little drop-down menu called Rectangle 1. inside of it, it has its own transformation panel, which is actually really useful for us as opposed to transforming things on some sort of generic anchor point that's always in the center of our document. I'm going to transform this around an anchor point based on the shape. So let me zoom out here. So inside of shape layer 1, under rectangle 1, under transform rectangle 1, there's another rotation attribute here. Now if you scrubby slide it, watch what happens. See, the behavior is totally different. It's rotating around the center because the anchor point, which you can't see because my rectangle is so small, it's right in the center of the rectangle. Okay, so as opposed to rotating around some sort of arbitrary point in the center of my document, which was right about here, it's rotating around the anchor point in the center of that actual object, which makes animating that object much, much easier. All right, now I don't want to animate rotation. What I want to do is I actually want to move the anchor point, which is relative to this object, and then I want to animate the scale of this object. So first we'll animate the anchor point. I'm going to move my, right here. That's the end. I'm going to add a keyframe because I want this to be my endpoint on the scale. Okay, so that's where I want this to finish up. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scrub my current time indicator back to frame 1. And because I've got a keyframe set up here, if I make a change to the scale attribute, I'm going to get another keyframe. I'm just going to scrub my slider down to 0%. Oh, you know what? I don't want to do it both on x-axis and y-axis, so unclick the constraint proportions. I just want to do the x-axis. I'm just going to set it to 0. You can scrub it down to 0, or you can just click into that and push 0. There you go. So that's what this looks like now. Not working completely like we want it to, because that anchor point, remember, is still in the center of that object. I just want to move that. I want the transformation to happen around somewhere on the left-hand side of this object. So let's go to our frame 1. Sorry, I won't be able to see where we are. Go to the end of that animation. And we're going to change our anchor point. Okay, right here. I'm going to scrub the first value, remember the x-axis. I'm just going to scrub it to the left and see how this is moving relative to that anchor point. I don't know if you guys can really see that. I'm running out of room too. Son of a gun. There's my anchor point. You can see it now that it's not. Can you see that? What I'm basically trying to do is I'm trying to line up the left side of that rectangle with the center of my anchor point, because that's where I want the animation to happen from. So now if you scrub your slider, that's working better, but it's obviously way over to the right-hand side. That's just a simple fix. Grab your move tool, your selection tool, and just click and drag that over to the left. All right, now, did you guys have any questions about anything in that? Yeah.
Yeah, my disappeared again, but I don't know.
What disappeared?
My letters and stuff.
Do you have your range selector? I'll come over, Kaylin.